This is a Sports Catastrophe production. Hey there, how there, ho there. It's Jeff Gardner. Welcome to the Sports Catastrophe on this day. And on this day, November 22nd, 2008, the Montreal Canadiens finally decided to retire Patrick Roy's iconic number 33. Patrick Roy was the face of the Montreal Canadiens for 10 years in the Nets, and then got traded away to Colorado, where he played almost 10 years there before retiring. Bout had just been inducted to the Hockey Hall of Fame a couple years prior on his first attempt, and he really was one of the best goalies around. To understand Patrick Roy, you have to read the Patrick Roy autobiography that he and his dad wrote. But logically, this is how I remember things after reading the book. Patrick Roy was raised with a French father and an English mother, which was funny. He was a professional swimmer, but he was a pretty good goalie in hockey. Unfortunately for him, he always got stuck on bad teams, though. That his junior team, Gromby, gave up more than 60 shots a game, but yet he still had a decent save percentage. So much so that Montreal, with the 51st overall pick in 1984, took Patrick Roy in the draft that they were hosting at the Forum. And CBC was hosting the draft, well, the first round at least. So Patrick Roy was in his prime. Montreal would draft a goalie. They still had Steve Penny, who had made that Cinderella run in the 84 Stanley Cup playoffs for the Habitants. And then you got yourself Richard Sevigny and Doug Soltart and even a young Brian Hayward coming up. So the Habs needed something, and they took Patrick Roy. Ironically, they took Sidney Crosby's father, Troy, as a goalie in the same draft. So Patrick Roy spent his first year after being drafted by Montreal going back to the minors and then to the junior, then going to Sherbrooke for the AHL and helping Sherbrooke win the AHL title in 1985. There he would have to face tough competition from Steve Penny and Doug Soltart to be the number one goalie. And he impressed so much so they could risk getting rid of Soltart and Penny, although they got Brian Hayward back. So anyway, Steve Penny was a decent goalie, but Patrick Roy proved himself and got himself the starting role in the 1986 Stanley Cup playoffs. In his first Stanley Cup playoffs, Roy helped Montreal sweep Boston, take care of Hartford, albeit in a tough 7-game series, which Hartford could have won easily. And then a 5-game series for the New York Rangers, fellow Cinderella story in the Wales Conference, to get to the finals against the Calgary Flames. Roy was amazing as the Habs won in 5 games, no doubt helped by Brent Scrulin's 9-second overtime goal in Game 2, which is still, I believe, an NHL record for fastest goal in an NHL overtime. Fight me on it. So anyway, Patrick Roy was still at his prime and all that. It was like, wow, he won a Stanley Cup in his rookie campaign. He won the Conn Smythe. Nice look up for Roy. Indeedy, they did. Although Montreal would not repeat as Stanley Cup champions, they were still around. Unfortunately, though, once Sean Perron left the Habs and Pat Burns came in, Montreal did have some good times in 1989, scoring over 100 points as a team, but shockingly losing to Calgary in the Stanley Cup Finals on Forum ice, which was the only time a team ever did that to the Habs on Forum ice, winning Cup on Forum ice when the Habs were playing. Of course, the exception was the Rangers in 1928 winning the Cup at the Montreal Forum, but the Montreal Maroons were around. And no, they were not the Montreal Canadiens. They were a different Montreal team. The Maroons were for the English speakers and the Habs for the French. So anyway, thanks to Pat Burns' defense-first approach, Montreal started to slump offensively and keep getting taken out of the playoffs and all that. Jacques Demers was called in 92 once Pat Burns left to coach the Leafs. and he did well. Montreal did okay, but they were not the best team in their division. Not even the second best team in their division. So because of the playoff format at the time, they would have to be at the third best team in the division, face number 2, Quebec. So it was the Battle of Quebec. And this time, it was a little bit different. The Habs actually were down 0-2 in that series to the Nordiques, but then rattled off 11 straight wins over 3 playoff series. They won the 4 games against Quebec. They swept Buffalo, and they took care of the Islanders in the first 3 games before losing Game 4 by winning Game 5 on home turf. To go to the Stanley Cup Finals against the LA Kings, it was Gretzky versus Waugh. It was like amazing. It was either going to be Gretzky versus Lemieux or Gretzky versus Waugh, as they said. But, they were all happy for that. So Gretzky-Waugh was the matchup, and Patrick Waugh surprised everyone. After a terrible Game 1, Jacques Demers and his controversial issue of trying to raise Marty McSorley's stick measurement problems helped Montreal win Game 2, and then they won the next 3. But it didn't matter. Montreal won the Stanley Cup. Waugh felt good about himself. Waugh had a massive scare with an appendectomy, but he missed Game 3 of the first round series against Boston, came back for Game 4 somehow, and put on a clinic. But the Habs lost the series to Boston in 7. And in 95, the Habs didn't even make the playoffs for the first time in 25 years, which was amazing in itself. Yeah, it was a straight shortened season, but still. Unfortunately, Montreal's new coach, Mario Tremblay, was not really the best guy around. Ian Waugh kind of had a thing going. Tremblay and Waugh were actually teammates on the 86 Habs squad. But yeah, so Tremblay trying to announce things in English, but his English sucked, and Waugh laughed alongside Mike Keane. Unfortunately, Waugh was not too pleased with Tremblay's stuff, and, he was suffering in Montreal. Then came December 2nd, 1995, the day that everyone remembers. And that's when Patrick Waugh gave up 9 goals as the Habs got shellacked by the Red Wings 11-1. Now, the Red Wings weren't a cream puff team. The Red Wings that year did win 62 games. So, in essence, they lost to a pretty good team. But Waugh was stayed in for 9 goals. It wasn't Waugh's decision, it was Tremblay. Waugh was hoping after 5 or 6 goals to be yanked from the net for Pacioblonski, but he didn't. But unfortunately, Waugh stayed in for 9 goals against. He was not too happy with Tremblay, and then basically barked at Habs president Ronald Corey, "This is my last game in Montreal," which it was, because Montreal was soon trading to Quebec. No doubt helped by the fact that Pierre Lacroix, the GM of the Avalanche, actually was Waugh's agent at a time. So anyway, he went from Montreal to Colorado alongside Mike Keane, helped Colorado win the Stanley Cup in 96. Montreal struggled along without him. And people just wanted Tremblay's head on a platter because, if it wasn't for his petulance, I think Waugh probably would have stayed in Montreal. But I doubt that. He probably would have betrayed it. But anyway, yeah, Waugh helped Colorado win 2 Stanley Cups in his time as an Avalanche goalie from 96 to 2003. And then, he retired. And then in 2006, he got to the Hall of Fame. And then 2 years later, Montreal said, "Why don't we just retire Patrick Waugh's number 33?" So using numerology, they decided to have the thing on November 22nd, 2008. Because 11, it was the 11th month of the year, November, and the 22nd day, which adds up to 33. So Canadians had a great time with 2 big ceremonies. Waugh's number being retired in Montreal, and Wendell Clark's number being honored in Toronto. Although in 2016, Leafs management decided to change it up a bit and say that all the honored numbers would be retired numbers, finally. So anyway, Waugh got his due back in Montreal. I mean, he was back in Quebec anyway as head coach of the Quebec Ramparts of the and won a Memorial Cup with them. Ramparts of the Quebec Hockey League. So Waugh felt good to be in Montreal. He went back to coaching for Colorado, did okay in a sense, but in the end, it just wasn't meant for him. I think he'd rather have been in Quebec because of all the media and all that. So yeah, so Waugh got his number retired. Rightfully so. I mean, the Avalanche retired his number first. I'm surprised Montreal didn't do it before Colorado, but, it doesn't matter. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. I do.